All right, Dr. Teryn, welcome back. How are you?
Fine. How are you doing? It's great to be back.
Yeah, well, we're recording this the week of Thanksgiving, so the show probably won't actually release until January, so we're trying to get a head start. But before we actually hit record, you were telling me about how you're going to have all your kids back this afternoon home for the holidays. So what just what is that like? Like I mentioned, like, it's hard to get my arms wrapped around that because I'm in the throes of raising my triplets plus one right now, but I know there will come a day when they all leave and then what's it like having them all back?
It's so nice. So we still have one at home, but having one at home is so quiet because you just don't hear the kid to kid chatter, which you'll have when your triplets leave for college and then you still have one at home. It's really weird having an only child at home. So when they come back, it's just all the laughter and all their inside jokes and their little thing. I mean, they're probably talking about us and laughing at us half the time, which is totally fine. But it's just nice to have all that, those happy sounds, all that joy. And it's interesting when they come back, they have such an appreciation for being at home. My kids just love cooking in a full kitchen that's not a shared dorm kitchen or an apartment kitchen. I think they really appreciate having nice cookware. But it's just all the happy chatter, and then to see what things, what restaurants they want to go to or what things they want to do in their home. It's just fun to realize what they liked the most, which when you're in the throes of it, it's just hard to observe that. That is just
Do
great.
you and
It's
your
so fun.
husband do you when they come back like this, do you and your husband feel like you know the work was worth it? I guess I'm trying to think of a better way to explain that because right now, like, my daughter woke up on the wrong side. She went to bed on the wrong side of the bed last night, and she woke up on the wrong side of the bed again this morning. And it's like whenever we start the day like this, it's like, oh my God, it takes me like 10 minutes to do like the breathing exercises, and it still wasn't working this morning.
Yeah, I mean, it does feel totally worth it when you see them being adults that are out in the world, working or living independently in college. So yeah, that part is just great. It's funny. I had another thought when you were talking about them waking up on the wrong side of the bed. Now I can't remember what it was. Shoot, if it comes back, I'll just hop in with it.
Well, today we're going to talk about something that's going to be really relevant here in January is goals versus resolutions. And there's one stat I don't know the specific date. Maybe you do. Is that I think it's by like early or mid like February, everybody's goals or resolutions are basically like thrown out the window. Like by like early on in the new year, people that have put down goals or resolutions really they just stop. And so I think the question I want to I think start with this today is how do you define the difference between a goal and a resolution, and then we'll just let the conversation go from there.
Yeah, so a resolution is typically, a declaration, one statement of I'm stopping this now or I'm starting this for the year. And they tend to be, a broad, vague statement of I'm going to get healthy in 2025, or I'm going to stop eating sugar in 2025, or I'm going to stop smoking in 2025. So they tend to be kind of broad, vague, not particularly defined, compared to when you set a goal and you set it in a way that your brain can really take it in and start working on accomplishing it. Those are generally SMART goals. Those are completely tailored to the way the brain works. And so that's why I would encourage people if this comes out in January and they already set a resolution, they may have already struggled with it. It's not too late to start a SMART goal, a small start goal. And maybe a better idea for doing that is kind of thinking about a new SMART goal each month rather than this massive thing at the beginning of the year, which we all have done that before and failed at it. So we're familiar with how it just doesn't work with the way our brains is set up.
So for our audience, let's define what that acronym SMART goal means. So
So
I know it, but go ahead.
yeah, yeah. So if listeners aren't familiar with it or haven't revisited it in a while, so SMART goals are small, or sorry, specific specific goals instead of, I want to start exercising 2025. It might be, I'm gonna take a walk 3 days a week, starting tomorrow. So a little more specific instead of big and vague. And then as for measurable, so that would be just taking this walk through this. It might be, Monday, Wednesday, Friday for the next 3 weeks so that we know exactly when we should have accomplished that or if we're keeping up on it. It could even also have a time of day. Could be right after breakfast or after my first cup of coffee, so that it kind of sets a little bit of a deadline. If I've gone to work, I had my breakfast and I already had my coffee and I haven't done that walk, that I already know I'm a little bit late for it and I've got to find time in the day, rather than getting to the end of the day and go, I didn't do the walk I said I was going to do. Now I should do it. Has to be attainable, so that would be realistic. It can't be like I'm going to start, by deadlifting 200 pounds in the next week. It has to
I
be
think
something you
that's
can
the
do.
toughest one. I think the A is the attainable, I think is the toughest one for people.
Yeah, sorry about that. My daughter's calling, and now I'm wondering like what's happening at home. And so the attainable and realistic, and then time bound is one of the T's. I add a second T on. So time bound would be giving yourself a goal in terms of time. So that's part of the reason that just 2025 is too vague. So bringing it to a realistic goal, for 2 weeks, for 3 weeks, or for 1 week or 2 weeks in a row. It can be, any kind of time measurement that you can put on there. And then I add a second one, which is tiny. So, part of, if we're talking about exercise, it's hard to go from no exercise to an hour of exercise a day. It's hard to prioritize that. It's really a big shift. So the smaller we can make that goal in terms of tiny, exercise can be, I'm going to do one squat today. I'm going to do one jumping jack. It's absurd. And that absurdity usually leads you to do more than you even set. So, and that feeling of exceeding your goal actually gives you an extra dopamine boost, which is our reward chemical. And so if we can set them really, really tiny, and then meet them, that gives us one dopamine hit. If we can exceed them by a bit, it gives us a second dopamine hit. So that's the way I approach goal
And
setting.
I'll link back to our one of our conversations a few conversations ago, because you talked about this when we were talking about tiny habits and habit stacking. And so I think that's what you're touching on there is one of our really dovetails in one of our previous conversations. From the work that you do with working with patients, is there one of those in the SMART goal acronym, if you will, one that you see that's the hardest? Because like I mentioned, I think the one that I think people struggle with, at least from the financial planning world that I live in, is the attainable. Like these goals are so big, kind of like what you were just talking about, is that they're not realistic. The whole saving, if you've never really had a consistent saving plan before, the thought of saving even like $1,000 in a year could be very daunting if you aren't saving like $100 a month. So you're breaking that up, and I think this goes back to our previous conversation too, breaking that bigger goal into smaller bite-sized chunks that's meaningful. And then to your point, it's like when you see some success, it just kind of builds on top of each other and you get that positive momentum.
Right. And I think it's sometimes even within that SMART, so I didn't talk about, but R for relevant. So sometimes when people are looking at their goal of, let's say, saving for retirement, I mean, that goal is relevant. It doesn't feel as relevant to them to save, $50 this month. That doesn't seem like it's relevant to their goal. So sometimes that one, we need some data to back it up to encourage people that this will make a difference. Like if I'm trying to have somebody cut back their sugar, for them to, if they're, for example, having, a fancy coffee drink like a mocha pretty much every day on their way to work, to them it might not seem like cutting down one of those a week is really that relevant to a sugar goal because they're still getting a ton of sugar. It's going to take time. So sometimes that one, it's really mapping out the making it into an action plan and seeing how that goal is going to slowly build a new habit that over time is going to get to their big relevant goal, but not trying to go from, 7 days a week of a really sugary coffee drink to none, because that's painful and people are going to fail. But taking out one a week, so sometimes I find, like with the savings, you kind of have to look at that map out of how amazingly money grows over time just from
Power
small changes.
compounding.
Yeah. So it's really a problem with the dopamine system. Sometimes we are only set up to get dopamine hits from accomplishing big things, or when we're seeing only that big, like I want to have $100,000 in my savings account tomorrow. Like that would be a huge dopamine hit, right? That's where gambling comes in. That's where buying lottery tickets comes in. But it's hard to focus the brain on really small goals and get those little hits of dopamine and have that be enough. So you get a bigger hit of dopamine by going out and shopping and spending $100 than you do by saving $100. And that's something we have to work against in terms of setting a smart goals, setting action plans, and then committing to that.
So, in your work with your neurology patients, especially those that are, you know, maybe on the precipice or cusp of dementia or Alzheimer's diagnosis, do you find working with them, even maybe at some advanced ages, that creating smart goals for them is some kind of like positive influence for them?
Yes, because the brain really needs clear instructions. And that's where a lot of goal setting or resolutions breaks down. And so what I used to find with my patients especially is I would try to give them all that instruction during, a 1 hour consultation or follow up. And it's really hard to follow that. Part of what I really designed the book to do was to reinforce the conversation would start in clinic and then give people clear instructions. So the decision making part of the brain, the executive function part, is called the prefrontal cortex. And when we just give a vague instruction of, really need you to cut down sugar to ease the burden on your brain, or I really need you to start exercising or socialize more, the prefrontal cortex has this vague instruction. And then every decision you're making, the prefrontal cortex is asking, does this fit in that? It's trying to define what that goal is, and it's constantly working to evaluate, does this fit in with that? Does this fit in with that? Does this fit in with that? And so if people give their prefrontal cortex a more clear goal to work with, I'm not going to have my mocha on Tuesday mornings. It's super clear, and it doesn't lead the prefrontal cortex to that decision fatigue that it constantly has to do. So the better definition we can give our brain to make and to accomplish goals and set new habits, the better. And so I found, as a physician, the clearer instructions I could give my patients, it was the exact same thing, not giving them these vague, nebulous instructions, but really a plan on pen and paper of how we're going to get to these goals and how we're going to build new habits. So, but I'm sure all of your listeners can relate to decision fatigue. We come across that in many aspects of our life.
Yeah, I run into that a lot, kind of going back to the whole retirement, because retirement is such a big planning destination, if you will. And I think we've talked about this before, and I know I've talked about this with I let Fishbach, who I've had on the show before, about this middle problem. So people are really excited at the beginning of a goal or journey, and then they're excited about the end and about what the destination can look like. But in the middle, that's where people lose a lot of that motivation. And ironically, I was just meeting with a family last night, and I had the same inclination. And I've really tried to change this about the financial planning process that I have implemented and worked with the families that I do at TAMMA, is to try to not make it overwhelming. Because when people show up at my doorstep for the first time, there's typically a lot of a higher level of anxiety, maybe some trepidation, some fear. And so I'm always trying to work to bring that down. And I'm guessing that's kind of somewhat similar to when when a patient shows up in your office for the first time and not knowing, really what's going on as far as their neurological health. Same way with these families from a financial standpoint. And so I used to do this. I used to overload them with information. And for the last several years, and trying to like refine my process and make it a better client experience, is to try to give them less and less, but give them more consistency of these are the things that we should be doing, and kind of like a step function of like, okay, we need to do this before we need to do this before we need to do this whole crawl, step, run kind of mentality.
Yeah, I mean that is exactly utilizing the brain pathways as we understand them, because the brain craves efficiency. That is what it will always try to get to, is efficiency. So when we have too many decisions or too many options, it's easy to get overwhelmed. And so when we can give people a simple plan that they can follow and externalize actually some of the motivation into just steps forward that are prescribed, it can be really helpful, especially if it's consistent with their overall goal. But we can take some of that day-to-day decision making out of it, which gets so overwhelming and is not a particularly efficient process for the brain. So that can sound a little paternalistic, but we can coach people to do that for themselves too, if that's the preference. But a lot of times people really want a recipe for success. It sounds like the same thing in financial planning as it is for improving their brain health.
That's an interesting point you just brought up. Do you feel like in the work that you're doing with your patients is you're more like a coach than anything else? Because I feel that way a lot when it comes to the families I work with, and being this partner with them on this not only financial journey but lifestyle, personal journey as well. Because I think a lot of people still have this stereotype of, or this thought of like what financial planning is, and then when they show up in my office for the first time, or meet me virtually, they're like, oh, this is not what I had in mind at all. It's completely different, usually in a positive way. But I wonder, in your practice as a neurologist, like how, if you have any inclination on how people view you as, do they view you as that coach and partner?
I think there's been a huge shift in medicine from even when I trained. That was much more of a model of the physician kind of just instructing people, just take this medicine, this is what you're going to do, not being even particularly responsible for needing to explain how it worked, why it might be beneficial. And now, with the shift more towards what I do, which is more lifestyle medicine, my goal is to prevent disease more than to try to fix disease with medicine, especially in Alzheimer's disease, where our medicines don't cure Alzheimer's disease. It's really imperative to prevent. And we are in lifestyle medicine much more of a team working together, because I can't make those lifestyle changes for them. They have to make them for themselves, but we can come up with a great plan together, and I can support their lifestyle choices. And if there are some particular challenges or if they fall into bad habits, we can work on that again. So it really has shifted, and I would guess that you've seen a similar shift in financial planning, where it might be that you'd give an advisor your money and they would just do some magic in the background with it, and then you'd check how
I
it
think
was
I
coming
think that's
out.
honestly what people that's I think what honestly what people think of when they think of a financial advisor, is just that. It's like the person that manages my portfolio or picks the stocks or whatever. And there are people out there like that, but the I think that's a very common bond between the two of us, is how we run our practices in completely different fields. But then there's also a lot of overlap too, where that it's more lifestyle slash financial planning than it is, just the portfolio management piece. And like what you just explained, and in your practice in medicine, there's this lifestyle piece that needs to come, in front of or in conjunction with the actual medicine, if you will. Because like you just said, when it comes to Alzheimer's, dementia, mental health, it's more of a prevention game than it is a here's a pill to take solution game.
Yeah, exactly. It is interesting how the two fields have kind of morphed in the same way, and what's effective for success in both of them is teamwork and coaching.
So have you enjoyed that transition that from in your practice?
I have loved that transition. Yes, I mean, absolutely. I love it as a patient because I like being empowered to be in charge of my own health and see the differences I make or the changes I make result in differences in my health. And it's to see patients have success and they know they're responsible for that and they did that is super rewarding. It's so much better than just the feeling of getting out a prescription pad. And there just are so few things that we truly cure with medications. And there's so much chronic disease that seeing people be able to change their lifestyle and change the trajectory of their health is very rewarding.
Yeah, I would agree. There's this concept called the hero's journey, and in it there's the people have this perception of there. I use Star Wars as a good example where like there's this hero out there like Luke Skywalker, but really the hero of the journey is the person themselves. It's yeah, there's a guide there like a Yoda that helps guide like Luke around, but he's basically the hero of his own journey because he's the one that takes responsibility. But then there's our roles as a financial advisor, as a neurologist, medical professional, that we have this hand in helping guide and being that coach or partner with people to help them ultimately get to where they want to go. And I think that's one of the biggest changes in my firm that I've really emphasized over the last 3 or 4 years is understanding your purpose and objectives. And I'm assuming you go through this with your patients as well. It's like, okay, what do we want to achieve? Like, what's our why? The famous Simon Sinek book. And then what are the supporting objectives we need to do to achieve that why? And I've found that in the realm of financial planning, families that really have a solid idea of what their purpose and their objectives are go on to have tremendous success, not only financially, but personally as well, because they know what they ultimately want to achieve. And I'm just helping them bridge any gap between their personal life and their financial life.
Yeah, it's also a lot like parenting. You know,
Yes.
the support you give people when they're making their own decisions and you help guide them, but you certainly can't make those decisions for them. But you can give the information so they can do their best. And it's just a different level of parenting. And I think that's shifting even more from the more instructive prescribed to the supportive, you just shift as they age. And so a lot of parallels throughout life that way.
Yeah, so to pull on that thread a little bit more. You're in a really interesting transition with your kids right now because obviously you have one that's started his career, you've got another one in college, and you've got one at home, and so that's got to be a really cool melting pot because I'm sure that maybe the one that's left home, maybe he's coming back for a little bit more advice from time to time, maybe, and maybe you're not as dumb as you used to be, in his eyes.
Yeah, I mean, I had heard that statistic earlier, and I think I shared before that it's something like by the time they're a freshman in high school, you spent 80% of the time.
Yeah.
I think that's the statistic you're going to
Yeah.
spend with
Yep.
them in
We've
their
talked
lives.
about that. Yes.
Yeah,
Ballpark. We're
yeah,
we're in the range.
yeah, and we are going to spend more time with them in an adult to adult relationship than a kid relationship, and it's so hard to see that when you're in the kid part of it. When they're under your roof, and it's just amazing to see them come around and sometimes say the things that they've picked up from you, which you didn't realize was maybe an important message, or you didn't realize they were listening, and then you see that some of the wisdom you imparted really made a difference in the decisions they're making as an adult. It's super rewarding, and I think having one in each of those stages makes us really appreciate each of the stages itself. It's making us appreciate the one we have at home while we have them. We have it for another year and a half. So we're really in the moment with him, enjoying that. But at the same time, I see the future, when I look at his oldest brother, and I can see how cool that relationship's going to be when he's on the other side of college. So instead of making me kind of freak out that we're about to be empty nesters in a year and a half, I already have the reward of seeing how beautiful the adult to adult relationship is. So I'm not clinging on to him. I mean, I'm appreciating it. I'm in the day with him, but I'm not clinging on to it and fearful of the day he leaves just because I know it's going to be okay, which is hard when your first one leaves, you don't know that it's going to be okay, but it's really neat. And then I'm having fun realizing how quickly college went for our oldest. I'm having fun with my daughter at school, and she was worried about spending money on football tickets, and she's at Clemson, so it's like, I,
That's right.
spend the money on. I mean, student
Right.
tickets, first of all, aren't that much. They think they are, but they're
Right.
not. But it's like, go to every game you can because you're probably not going to go back to South Carolina and go to games, and it's never going to be as fun, and you're going to blink your eyes and be a graduate. So, I think all of those are making me appreciate everyone in their time. So it's kind of special. It's just so interesting when you have triplets leave all at the same time. I can't imagine. We've had much more of a dimmer switch on kids at home than
Yeah.
you've almost got a light switch there because it's going to be such a dramatic shift.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be interesting. I was actually having a conversation with a friend of mine that he had twins about 17 months ago. He had a plus one first, and then he and his wife decided, okay, let's just try to have one more, and then they got the twins. But yeah, I should try to think of that as well, and it'll be interesting to see like what they all decide to do. Meaning, do they all three like go away? Do one maybe stay local because we're here in Metro Detroit and there's lots of colleges around or universities. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see how that all works itself out. But we'll see. I'm getting more and more excited. Put it this way, Dr. Teryn, I'm getting more excited about it to like what you were pointing out. Like I'm not clinging to it like maybe I used to. I know there's things I'm certainly going to miss, about not having them home. And then I know there's things that I won't miss about having them home. So it'll just be the life transition and stages that we all go through as parents. So,
Yep.
but this is why I love having these conversations with you because we initially started off talking about goals and resolutions, and we make ourselves back to parenting and lifestyle planning, which is great. So yeah, like I said, I completely enjoy these conversations. I know our audience does as well because the feedback's been great. So I hope everyone out there has a great holiday or had a great holiday by the time that we release this show. But Dr. Teryn, thank you so much for being on again, and we'll look forward to the next conversation.
Yeah, I look forward to it. Happy 2025.